He really is a wicked person. Cory Harrison, the son of Rick Harrison, finally spoke out after his father was sentenced to life in prison, leaving fans completely stunned. At 9:13 a.m., when the media had stopped covering the case, a brief message believed to be leaked from an exclusive interview just hours earlier suddenly appeared everywhere. From Twitter to CNN, from fan forums to morning talk shows, everyone was shaken by this revelation. What made it even more shocking was that this message wasn't prepared by a professional spokesperson, nor was there a tearful press release or a staged video to control the damage. It was raw, unedited information, like a slap in the face to everyone who had once trusted Rick Harrison. This information didn't just destroy the image of a man, it exposed earth-shattering secrets that the public couldn't ignore. If you're curious about this story and want to learn more, leave a comment with the number 1. If not, leave a comment with the number 0. And don't forget to hit like, share this video so your friends and everyone around can discover it too. Make sure to subscribe to the channel so you won't miss any upcoming videos. Now, let's dive into the story. He is truly an evil man. The voice behind the words was Cory Harrison, Rick Harrison's son, the former beloved TV star of America, the owner of the world-famous gold and silver pawn shop, and the central figure in one of the most shocking criminal cases in modern entertainment history. Until recently, their father-son relationship had been the emotional backbone of Pawn Stars, the reality TV show that brought quirky doses of American history and light exchanges to viewers every week. But now, the atmosphere smells different. Nostalgia turns bitter. History becomes hollow. In that moment, everything Cory had once associated with, every smile, every handshake, every filming moment, felt like it had been dipped in poison. The consequences were immediate. The quote spread in less than 7 minutes. By noon, all the major entertainment channels had broadcast the story. By evening, History Channel had wiped out all traces of Pawn Stars from their platforms. Clips vanished, merchandise listings on YouTube disappeared from online stores, and longtime fans found themselves staring at their DVD boxes with a sense of confusion, fear, and disgust. What could make a son say such things about his father? What darkness existed behind the brightly lit counters of a pawn shop visited by millions? And exactly what did Rick Harrison do to deserve a life sentence without parole? The answer doesn't start with Rick's crimes, but with Cory's silence in the moment he finally spoke up. Cory did not respond to the media right after Rick was sentenced. When his father was dragged out of the federal courtroom in chains, his lips tightly sealed and his face unreadable, Cory wasn't in the crowd of supporters or legal representatives. He wasn't in jail. He wasn't at the pawn shop. He was in a hotel room in downtown Los Angeles, alone, watching the developments on television like everyone else in the country. For days, he didn't appear, refusing to answer calls, messages, or social media pings from fans, friends, and journalists. Rumors spread. Some people believed Cory was hiding. Others thought he might be preparing his own legal defense. Some even speculated he had left the country. But none of these were true. Cory Harrison was mourning something that no longer existed. The illusion of family. And on the 5th day of silence, he spoke up. The interview wasn't aired on national television, but was recorded by an independent documentary filmmaker with close ties to the Harrison family, a friend Cory trusted, someone he knew wouldn't fabricate the story. The footage lasted just under an hour, raw and emotional. There were no rehearsals, no edits, no script, just a camera, a dimly lit room, and a man ready to explode with truths he had buried for decades. America only saw a pawn shop. Cory's voice was hoarse, his hands trembling. I saw the real him when the camera stopped rolling. From that moment on, to understand the weight of Cory's words, you must rewind the clock. Rick Harrison wasn't just a businessman or a TV personality. He was an icon. He represented the resilience and allure of American labor. The guy could appraise a 19th century coin, negotiate for a Civil War rifle, and make you laugh for over a decade. The audience invited him into their living rooms. He became a household name, a staple of pop culture. But Rick was also a man with secrets, secrets buried in vaults, hidden in ledgers, and locked away in storage units that even seasoned investigators had to pause and reconsider. The public didn't know that at the time, but the very empire that brought Rick fame was also a cover for something much darker. It started with whispers, anonymous tips, unexplained disappearances, mismatched documents. But the real shift came when federal agents acted on a tip from a former employee, discovering a series of private storage lockers linked to Rick's business. Inside, they found something no one was prepared for: bodies, not freshly killed, not murdered in front of their eyes, but preserved, packaged, bones cataloged, organs and body parts stored in temperature-controlled containers, marked with codes and strange phrases like Subject 004B and Collection Year 1997, not seal. At first, law enforcement thought it was some sort of medical storage error, possibly an old pathology collection that hadn't been reported, but then scattered notes in the boxes were handwritten journals filled with names, dates, and disturbing sketches. They referenced rituals, preserving the image of celebrities, memory boxes and DNA maps, targets, obsessive paranoid tones, and chilling accuracy. These weren't just stolen artifacts, they were human lives, lives Rick was accused of using for a darker purpose: profit. The FBI agents quickly acted, raiding Rick's home in Las Vegas to find more evidence. What they found was beyond comprehension. In a secret room beneath his house, disguised behind a false wall in the wine cellar, was a room lined with glass jars containing bones, teeth, locks of hair, and objects later confirmed by forensic analysts to belong to people reported missing over a 20-year span. Then they found videotapes, old VHS cassettes, mini diver films, even 8mm film rolls. Some were labeled with dates, others had only initials. The common thread among them was graphic recordings of unidentified individuals being bound, posed, and in some cases measured, examined, or conversing with a man. Though partially obscured, the unmistakable voice and gestures of Rick were clear. This discovery turned Rick Harrison from a beloved television personality into the prime suspect in a series of crimes that shocked the nation. There were still many fans who hoped it was all a mistake. Cory, the son who had shared the screen with Rick for over a decade, stood up to defend his father. But Cory didn't defend him. He didn't deny the charges. He didn't ask for time or space. He called his father evil, and when asked what he thought about the life sentence without parole, Cory remained unfazed. "That's not enough," he said. "I've known for years that something was wrong. I just didn't know how deep it went or how far it went." What followed were a series of confessions that immediately changed the public's perception. There were nights he came home with scratches on his arm and dirt on his shoes. I asked him what happened, and he said he had been hiking or digging up old treasure, but I never saw any treasure appear. Then there were locked rooms in the pawn shop that I wasn't allowed to enter, even though I was a full-time part of the company. He said, "It's just storage." but no one ever went in. Not even security personnel. There were conversations where I'd step in and stop as soon as I opened the door, and strangers would appear in the middle of the night and leave without saying a word. At this point in the interview, Cory looked away from the camera, his hand clenched into a fist, something heavy in his eyes, maybe regret or guilt. "I think it was just paranoia," he said. "Maybe I'm exaggerating, maybe he was just a weird old man with weird secrets, but after what they found, I now know it was a hidden horror show." Clearly, the interview didn't end with a call for sympathy. Cory didn't position himself as a victim. He had honestly removed the silence and shame that had surrounded him for decades. "I should have spoken up sooner. Maybe someone could have been saved. Maybe some of those victims wouldn't have been victims. I can't undo what he did, but I won't be silent anymore." In the days following the release of that video, public opinion completely reversed. Cory went from being a silent outsider to an unwilling whistleblower. Families who were once angry at his silent complicity began to look at him differently. He wasn't a bad guy. He was the final witness who collapsed, and that's where our story begins. With the legacy of a broken family, with the rise and fall of a pawn shop turning into a nightmare, with a son choosing the truth over blood, and a nation struggling to accept that one of its most beloved television fathers might secretly be one of the cruelest criminals. This isn't just the story of Rick Harrison's downfall, it's the story of Cory Harrison's reckoning. Before the scandal, before the chains, before the screams in the courtroom and the footage broadcasted on news networks like a national nightmare, Rick Harrison was an American success story to millions. He didn't start with wealth. He wasn't born into power or privilege. He built his empire from a small family-run pawn shop in downtown Las Vegas and turned it into a globally recognized brand with business acumen, charm, and the ability to turn history into treasure. At least that was the image when Pawn Stars debuted in 2009 on History Channel. The show wasn't just a program, it was a phenomenon, where viewers didn't just watch people trade antiques, they watched a working-class family turn stone into gold while laughing, learning, and feeling like they were part of the deal. Rick Harrison, with his thinning hairline and quirky delivery, quickly became the heart of the operation. He was strict, but fair. Smart, but approachable. Someone who could tell you the story behind a Revolutionary War saber in one breath and haggle over a classic Pez dispenser with Spencer by his side. People liked him because he didn't try to be something he wasn't, or so they thought. Behind the scenes, Rick's influence extended far beyond the pawn shop. As the show succeeded, his influence grew. Rick started investing in other businesses, purchasing real estate, and quietly building a private collection of historical artifacts that, according to later reports, could rival some small museums. Those in the production team took note of how Rick meticulously controlled his image. Every joke, every quote, every cut of the final edit had to be scrutinized. He wasn't just a participant, he was the architect of the story. And for a time, the illusion kept the shop as a tourist destination. People queued outside for hours, hoping to catch a glimpse of the cast. Spin-off parts appeared, merchandise flooded the market, Rick's face appeared on t-shirts, bobblehead dolls, mugs, and fans flew in from all over the world. School teachers took their students to meet the man who made history exciting again. But behind that image, something much darker was always taking shape. Cory Harrison, known to viewers as Big Hose, constantly walked a complicated line between loyalty and rebellion. On screen, he was the charming son learning the ropes, clashing with his father over business decisions. Off-screen, he struggled with the pressure of fame, the tension of family expectations, and the quiet understanding that something wasn't right with his father. He always had a different device. Cory later said in his interview that there was something hidden behind the charm when the lights came on. He was Rick Harrison, and when they were away, he was entirely someone else, a person who had begun showing signs long before the cameras came on. According to former employees and early associates of the pawn shop, Rick always kept his business cards secret. He rarely allowed anyone into his private office, kept physical ledgers that were never digitized, and discouraged employees from questioning certain purchases, especially those involving items with unclear origins. He had rules, and a former employee who requested not to do so stated that there were certain boxes that would never be opened, certain transactions that would never be entered into the system. You just knew better than to ask why, but none of this was ever reported to the public at that time. Rick Harrison was an ordinary man turned businessman. He had devoted himself to the community, spoken at schools, and even lobbied in Washington on small business issues. No one doubted him. And then came the private auctions in the years before his arrest. Rick was accused of starting to hold exclusive events at remote locations around Nevada. These events were not advertised, not recorded, no receipts were issued. Only a select group of high-net-worth individuals were invited, many from abroad. At these auctions, according to FBI reports, a different kind of artifact began to appear. Human remains, fossil samples, body parts supposedly related to the history or origin of famous people, some marked with claims such as Napoleon's origin, Maryland DNA fragment, or unverified Kennedy series. The federal government now believes many of these items were fakes, designed to lure obsessed collectors into paying millions of dollars for counterfeit relics, but some were not fakes. Some were real, and they came from real people. This is where Rick's obsession with history turned into something completely different. No longer about money, a forensic psychologist said in one of the sentencing trials, but about control, about owning the past, about being the one to decide what would exist and what would be buried. Looking back, the pawn shop was the perfect front, giving Rick access to a revolving door of desperate sellers, rare items, and loopholes. It provided plausible deniability for every shady transaction and made him a household name, very popular, beloved to the point where no one could doubt what he was doing behind closed doors. Even his own son, Cory, spent his early years in the show marked by youthful ambition. He wanted to prove himself, not just to the audience, but to his father. There was a longing in his eyes, a desire for respect, but there were also brief moments, almost imperceptible, when something else flickered across his face. A doubt, a hesitation. "When I was young, I didn't question anything," Cory admitted. "I thought he was my dad. He knew what he was doing. He was building a future for us. I wanted to believe that. Who wouldn't?" But that trust began to crack when Cory asked for access to certain business files and was denied. Then one night, he found a locked briefcase in Rick's SUV. A briefcase filled with black and white photos of remains arranged like museum artifacts, cataloged with Rick's handwritten notes. That was when everything changed. Cory didn't confront his father that night. He didn't call the police. He didn't even talk to anyone about what he had seen. "I was scared," he admitted. "I didn't know if I was misunderstanding. I didn't want to be wrong, but I didn't want to be right either." Instead, Cory doubled down on the illusion. He smiled for the cameras, sold the brand, went on tour. During all that time, the shadow of that briefcase haunted him. It wasn't until the FBI raided his father's house years later that Cory finally understood the full extent of what he had been standing next to all that time. And when the judge handed down the life sentence, he didn't cry. He sat still, arms crossed, lips tight, staring at the man who had given him everything and taken away more than he could ever understand. Rick Harrison's rise was not just the rise of a businessman, but the construction of a legend, a carefully curated reality, using his family's fame and his passion for history as a shield for something much darker. It worked because we wanted it to. We liked the story. We liked the characters. We liked the idea that behind every dusty item in a pawn shop was a mystery waiting to be solved. But the biggest mystery was Rick Harrison himself. And now, with the mask removed, the only question left to ask is how deep the corruption ran and how long we were willing to ignore that stench just to keep watching the show. There is a moment in every person's life when silence becomes too great a burden to bear, and for Cory Harrison, that moment did not come during the raids. It didn't come in the courtroom, and it didn't even come when the judge banged the gavel and sentenced Rick Harrison to life behind bars. It came alone at midnight, when the cameras were gone, the headlines had faded, and the man he once called father was locked away forever. Cory had not planned to speak for many years. He had made peace with keeping secrets, secrets buried deep under decades of image control, family pressure, and fear. But when the final verdict was handed down, it tore down the wall that Cory had spent his entire adult life building, and everything behind it came crashing out. Those close to Cory said they had seen the change coming, not suddenly but gradually, like the quiet unwinding of a taut string that had been pulled for too long. He started arriving at the shop late. He stopped engaging with fans. The spark that was often seen in his eyes during interviews behind closed doors began to fade. He grew increasingly paranoid. He asked friends if they believed in curses. He started recording his phone calls. He slept with a loaded gun by the door, even in high-security hotels. The pressure mounted. The world moved on to the next scandal, but Cory couldn't move on from what he knew, from what he had seen. The final trigger was not an FBI report, not an anonymous tip, not even the footage obtained from Rick's secret cell, but something much simpler, something very human. A letter, 2 weeks after Rick's conviction. Cory received a handwritten letter addressed in his father's distinctive handwriting. The letter had no return address and was postmarked Las Vegas. Inside was just one page, no greeting, no signature, just 5 words written in uneven script. You always knew, nothing more. There were no explanations, no regrets, no apologies, just a command and an accusation. Cory sat with the letter for an hour before he moved. He stared at the ink, reading that sentence over and over until it faded. He tore it in half, then again, until it turned to dust between his fingers. That night, he didn't sleep. The next morning, he picked up the phone and called a name that had been in his back pocket for many years. Elijah Rhodes, an independent documentary filmmaker and close friend who had filmed behind the scenes of Pawn Stars during the early seasons. Elijah wasn't just someone Cory trusted. He was someone who had witnessed enough cracks to know Cory wasn't lying. Elijah Cory said it was time for them to meet in a small Airbnb apartment in Hollywood Hills. far from the chaos of the city, with no film crews, no lights, just a camera, a tripod, and a bottle of whiskey left on the table. Cory sat down, cleared his throat, and looked directly into the lens. What happened next was not rehearsed. In 57 uninterrupted minutes, Cory peeled away each layer of silence that haunted him since he was a teenager. He spoke about the first time he suspected something was wrong. He was 16, rummaging through the storage room of the shop after hours looking for a box of old baseball cards he had been promised. Instead, he found a small locked refrigerator. "Strange," he said, because inside there were no drinks, at least not the kind anyone would want to sip on. Instead, he found something resembling a sealed specimen jar floating inside, something he couldn't explain. A dark mass partially obscured by a cloudy liquid with a date and a series of numbers that meant nothing to him. He didn't tell anyone at the time, even when later he learned that a woman matching the description of a missing local had been at the shop just weeks before the date on the jar's label. At first, he rationalized everything. Maybe Rick was collecting odd items for a medical record. Maybe it was a prop. Maybe it had a reasonable explanation. But the more he tried to convince himself, the more he noticed the inconsistencies. The late-night trips Rick made to the desert with burlap bags, the deliveries received through the back door without invoices, the heated arguments between Rick and nameless men in suits who came and went without names or explanations, a private room in the basement of the pawn shop that was off-limits to everyone, even Cory, which Rick always referred to as the storage room. Cory remembered one night years later when he dared to ask what was inside. Rick looked him straight in the eyes and said, "You don't want to know. You just want to keep living like this." He laughed after saying that, but Cory knew the laugh wasn't a joke. It was a warning, and Cory heard it loud and clear. He stopped asking, buried his doubts, played the loyal son because if he didn't, the men would beckon a truth he wasn't ready to accept. "I was scared," Cory admitted in the interview. "Not just about what I might find, but about what I'd become if I kept pursuing it. Because once you know, you can't go back." The tipping point Cory reached came when he read his father's letter. Not just the guilt, but years of cognitive dissonance from living two lives, smiling in front of the camera while dying inside. The confession, in that sense, wasn't a performance, but a purge. He confessed that he had considered turning Rick in years ago, that he had almost contacted a private investigator, that he had written a detailed journal outlining all the strange things he witnessed with dates, names, and photos. In case something happened to him, the journal Cory revealed had been given to the FBI. He even admitted his complicity. "I knew something was wrong. Maybe not the whole picture, but enough, and I said nothing. But he made it clear that silence was no longer an option. I won't protect a man who prays for others, who used his fame to conceal the truth, who mocked every handshake, every laugh, every piece of history he claimed to honor." The interview ended with a question that Elijah hesitated to ask, almost unsure if Cory would answer. "What do you want people to take away from this?" Cory took a breath, his eyes red, his voice low. "Monsters don't always look like monsters. Sometimes they wear your face, sometimes they have dinner with you, sometimes they teach you to ride a bike or sell pocket watches on TV, but they're still monsters." He stood up, walked away from the camera, and didn't look back. That footage was never meant to be public, not immediately. Cory had requested it to be released only when more evidence came to light, but the interview leaked, and within 48 hours, snippets started appearing online. First a quote, then a full minute, then the entire video was anonymously uploaded to a file-sharing site and viewed millions of times before being taken down. By then, it was too late. The truth had been exposed, and Cory's life would never be the same again. The documentary world reached out, and so did Netflix, Hulu, HBO, offering book publishing contracts and chat show invitations flooding in. Cory turned them all down. He wasn't interested in profiting from his confession. His goal now was to help authorities uncover what still remained hidden, to bring closure to families who had spent decades searching for answers. Because in the end, the issue wasn't just Rick Harrison's crimes, but the system that allowed them to deepen the silence that had protected them, and the Sun had finally found the courage to break it. It's a place built on nostalgia, framed by classic signs and the ticking of grandfather clocks. Tourists from all over the world come through those doors, hoping to find pieces of history they can touch. War rifles, rare coins, signed sports memorabilia by legends. For over a decade, the Gold and Silver Pawn Shop has existed as a living museum of American eccentricities. But beneath the surface, through display cases and ready smiles for photos, the pawn shop holds secrets far beyond price tags and origins. It all started with a locked door, which staff referred to as the room. After some joked that it was where Rick kept his retirement gold, others thought it was just a messy office space used for bookkeeping. But over the years, rumors began. Whispers circulated among staff about noises at night, furniture moving without explanation, and orders being accepted long after the shop had closed. For a place with such high foot traffic, there were strange absences, unregistered items appearing in the store's stock, only to disappear quickly, cameras mysteriously shutting off during late-night shifts in some areas, especially the storage room beneath the stairs, marked as off-limits, even to long-time employees. One former employee, who requested to remain anonymous, described it this way: "It's like being part of a magic show. You see what's in front, you know something's going on backstage, but you're not allowed to look. If you ask, you'll be reassigned. If you ask again, you'll be fired." Another employee recounted how Rick would receive packages, wooden crates with no labels or shipping info, never recorded in the store's official ledger. They would be pushed in after hours, taken straight to the back room, and never seen again. According to an insider whistleblower, one of the crates, now in the hands of federal investigators, emitted a chemical stench so strong it made 2 employees feel nauseous when asked about it. Rick is said to have remarked, "It's preservation material you don't want to open." No one opened the Gold and Silver Pawn Shop doors. It wasn't just a business, it was a fortress. It had its own security system, a private storage area, and even a basement that had never been opened to the public or featured on television. But perhaps the most disturbing thing is how much of this had become normal. Employees didn't ask about the locked doors. They didn't challenge the inconsistencies. The strange became routine. Rick's authority in the shop was absolute. No board of directors, no external audits. The family owned and ran every aspect of the business, and Rick had made it very clear from the start that curiosity was unwelcome. In one instance, a new security guard had tried to follow Rick down to the basement after hearing something that sounded like machinery buzzing and a heavy object being dragged. He didn't get far. Rick met him halfway up the stairs, silently stared at him for a few seconds, then said, "You'll want to turn back, son." The guard was reassigned to parking duty the next day for Cory. The signs were always there. The unsettling moments when Cory first saw his father arguing with a foreign-speaking man over an unregistered gun. How Rick reacted violently when a collector accidentally opened a drawer in his office. And when Cory tried to access a set of stored ledgers, only to find them sealed in a safe Rick kept behind a two-way mirror. But the most revealing secret lay in a room Cory had only seen once, the holiest part of the shop. No cameras, no staff, no documents. Rick took him there when Cory turned 25, as a sort of rite of passage. The door required two separate keys, a physical key and a digital key. The fingerprint lock Rick had installed inside was not what Cory had expected. It wasn't dusty or messy, it was neat, with medical glass shelves along the walls, each shelf holding a number of sealed containers. Other things were labeled with barcodes, some scrawled with notes and dates. In the center of the room was a stainless steel table under surgical lights. Cory recalled the silence, not just quiet, but a space void of electronic noise. No outside sounds, only the gentle hum of filtered air. "What is this?" he asked. Rick smiled, closed the door behind them, and said, "This is where history is waiting." He never explained what that meant. That moment would repeat in Cory's mind for many years. He tried to rationalize it, justify it. Maybe it was a high-value appraisal room, maybe some exquisite antique crates, maybe the lighting was for better inspection. But then there was the smell, not of decay, but of disinfectant chemicals, a scent that lingered on his clothes long after he left the room. The deeper he investigated Rick's operations, the clearer that room became. It turned out Rick had maintained a secondary warehouse, items that never went through production, never entered the digital database, never appeared on the show. These ghost items were tracked by a separate ledger found in Rick's private locker after his arrest. The entries weren't about coins or guitars, but specimens. Entries listed things like bone marrow 1992, dental artifact SE 1217, and preserved segment Cairo shipment. None of this matched traditional pawn shop activity. None of it had legal paperwork. But the dates matched strange, unsolved cases, individuals who vanished without a trace, their disappearances occurring within days of Rick receiving his mysterious shipments. An FBI agent described this system as a carefully staged, multi-layered operation to collect, preserve, and profit from human remains under the guise of historical preservation. Even more troubling was the revelation that some of these items had been auctioned to collectors. Many of them believed they were buying legitimate scientific oddities. But when these items were tracked and tested, they yielded horrific results. Human remains, unmarked. Genetic material linked to missing people from 3 different states. The pawn shop, once a symbol of quirky capitalism, had become something entirely different. A make-up storage facility, where the dead were traded as collectibles, their identities stripped, their stories reduced to numbers in a ledger. Employees who spoke out after the scandal described the deep culture of silence and threat. You just don't ask. One longtime employee said, "Everyone knew there were things you weren't allowed to touch. Topics you weren't allowed to bring up. If you stayed in your lane, you'd get paid handsomely. If not, you wouldn't stay long." Some said they had been asked to sign additional NDAs when hired, documents that went beyond standard confidentiality and included language about national security interests and non-disclosure of archaeological material. At the time, they thought it was just a standard legal document. But now they wonder if it was used to legitimize a cover-up. There is also evidence that Rick used his reputation to discredit anyone who got too close. A local historian claimed she approached Rick in 2016 with questions about an artifact she believed had been stolen from a burial site in the Middle East. Within a month, she lost her university scholarship, and her name was removed from academic publications. She later discovered that a complaint letter had been sent to her department, accusing her of falsifying identification documents, a letter that, according to metadata, originated from an IP address linked to Rick's office. Whenever someone got too close to Rick, pulling strings, whenever someone questioned the illusion, they disappeared from the story. But the most damning evidence didn't come from a document or a container, but from a video recovered from a private vault beneath the store, evidence requiring both a code and biometric scan. It was a security recording, grainy, dated December 18, 2013, showing Rick escorting two individuals with unclear, blurred identities into the back room. He was holding what appeared to be a wrapped object nearly the size of a human body. The video was cut after less than 10 minutes. As the camera continued to roll, those individuals disappeared, and Rick was alone, wiping down a table with a cloth soaked in black liquid. Investigators say this footage is now being used to cross-reference missing persons reports and international trafficking cases, but the implications were clear. The pawn shop had never just been a pawn shop but a front, a trap, hiding something unspeakable. Cory later recalled that the moment he stepped into that room, the room with jars and lights, he felt something inside him shut off. Part of his humanity he would never fully regain. He didn't know exactly what his father was doing, not fully, but he knew it wasn't about antiques, and it certainly wasn't about historical preservation. It was about ownership, control over life and death, repackaged as collectible curiosities. If you found this video surprising and intriguing, don't forget to hit like, share the video, and leave your thoughts in the comments below to let us know what you think. Make sure to subscribe to the channel so you won't miss any exciting videos. Now, let's continue with the story. FBI Special Agent Marissa Kent was not a woman easily startled. She had spent her entire career chasing organized crime rings, international traffickers, and war criminals hiding in the shadows of diplomatic immunity. But nothing could have prepared her for the contents of the information sent to her that night. The voice on the other end was small and trembling. The caller refused to give his name but claimed to have worked for Rick Harrison's private courier service. He spoke of unmarked crates, untraceable cash payments, and late-night deliveries to a series of temperature-controlled storage units located in an industrial park on the outskirts of Las Vegas. And then he said 5 words that made Kent's hairs stand on end. There are bodies in the crates. At first, it sounded like a scam, a bitter ex-employee trying to take down a famous boss, but the caller provided detailed information. Codes used on delivery receipts, serial numbers of storage units, even a preliminary inventory of what was inside. He claimed that he had accidentally opened one crate and seen something resembling a human mummy, preserved in a glass box with metal handles, labeled with a date and a barcode system that didn't match any commercial or military format. The next morning, an emergency sealing order was filed under urgent protocol. Within 48 hours, the FBI assembled a multi-agency task force to search the industrial park. What they found would shake the entire agency. In total, there were 7 storage units, all registered under a front company named Harrison Asset Protection, LLC. Paper trails led back to a P.O. box in Reno and a series of inactive offices with no staff, no phone numbers, and no legal business activity. Inside each unit was a meticulously arranged maze of metal shelving units, containers, and sealed freezers. What agents found was unbelievable. The first unit contained human remains, not scattered, not torn apart. Body parts and fragments carefully preserved in industrial vacuum-sealed plastic and labeled with a marker. RH47VE21ME03. The acronyms meant nothing to the agents at the time, but as they soon discovered, they were part of a larger cataloging system Rick had developed over years, indicating the acquisition dates, locations, and the most suspicious historical values. Some containers were marked with cryptic references: Egyptian Cross Sample 3 of Kennedy, and unverified Roman relics, some including references to specific dates, locations, and global phrases like customer announcement, keep in cold storage. At first glance, the entire setup seemed clinical, almost museum-like in its order, but then agents found hundreds of photographs, including Polaroids, digital prints, and negatives, all showing posed images of human remains. On what appeared to be antique furniture surrounded by historical memorabilia, some victims were dressed in parts of makeshift military uniforms, while others were surrounded by items from different eras: World War II medals, Renaissance-era cups, 1920s Prohibition signs. There were even photos of ongoing open surgeries, showing some specimens having been altered after autopsy. One particularly disturbing record showed a complete human skeleton covered in velvet and placed on a throne resembling that of Louis XIV. Another record showed a baby-sized body in a glass jar labeled as acquired from Southeast Asia, a gift from a client not to be displayed. These were not just remains. They were staged exhibits, bizarre tables designed for an audience that may or may not have existed. As the agents moved into the second and third units, things grew darker. Here, they found hundreds of handwritten notebooks, each page filled with obsessive detail. The entries cataloged everything from blood type to decomposition speed, pH levels, and preserved tissue. Notes on bombing techniques, failed attempts at cryopreservation, and comments on reconstructive rituals. Investigators quickly realized these were not just notes, but Rick's personal journals, a roadmap through the underworld where pseudo-historical science and human exploitation collided. Each book had dates. Each entry had a timestamp from someone in 1993. But the most disturbing discovery occurred in the fourth unit, which had been locked with a biometric scanner. After a failed break-in attempt, agents contacted the Department of Justice for alternative access. When they finally forced the unit open, they found what would later be described in federal court documents as the largest illegal human biological specimen collection in U.S. history. It contained entire bodies, some intact, others dissected and arranged by bone groups. Glass tanks filled with clear fluid, intact corpses preserved in gel, showing no signs of decomposition. One container held what appeared to be conjoined twins preserved during dissection. Another contained a man in a fetal position, with wires protruding from his skull, as if in the middle of an abandoned experiment. Agents also found a digital server rack, tightly encrypted, containing terabytes of footage, including videos with timestamps of Rick Harrison speaking directly into the camera in a clip dated June 15, 2004. He stood on a stainless steel table, describing a body as one of the cleanest collections he had ever handled. He narrated the removal of organs, the injection of preservatives, and the process of aligning the anatomical integrity to fit the appropriate conditions of the era. The cold, almost academic language, but the voice unmistakable. His forensic team had spent weeks analyzing the data, cross-referencing DNA samples with unsolved missing person cases. To date, at least 38 sets of remains had been identified, with some individuals matching reports of missing persons from 1997. The victims ranged in age from 9 to 64. They came from different states, different socioeconomic backgrounds, and lifestyles. Some had no known connection to the pawn shop, yet all had been collected, cataloged, and displayed. There were many theories: human trafficking, illegal anatomical sales, psychological obsession, cult-like motives. Some even speculated that Rick was part of a global black market network of collectors willing to pay millions for preserved human remains tied to historical fantasies or fabricated stories. The FBI had yet to confirm the existence of such a network, but some recovered documents contained names and addresses that are now under investigation. The 5th and 6th units contained artifacts, but not any typical ones. They included stolen cultural treasures from conflict zones, such as an Egyptian Kopik vase believed to be over 3,000 years old, Samarian tablets with untranslated sections, Nazi insignia and weapons, including a rifle reported missing from a World War II museum in Berlin, a mummified hand wrapped in cloth, engraved with what appeared to be ancient Aramaic. Some of these items had been reported as stolen years ago, their traces cold, now lying still under fluorescent lights, evidence of another type of crime, a crime that transcended international borders, desecrating sacred sites and violating global cultural heritage protections. But it was the 7th and final unit that forced agents to pause before entering. The air was thicker, the temperature colder, and the silence unnatural. Inside was a single chair, a Victorian high-back chair upholstered in purple leather, placed in the center of the unit like a stage. In front of it, a camera on a tripod, next to a microphone affixed to the back of the chair, was a historical note, which was never found. It had been made, the citation now appearing in the official FBI raid report, and it continues to haunt every agent present that day. After the sweep, a federal forensic team spent 3 months cataloging and removing evidence. The documents were boxed, sealed, and transferred to multiple facilities across the country, a special archive. Since the investigation was initiated, overseen by a joint task force from the FBI, Interpol, and the Smithsonian Institute, Rick Harrison has been detained, refusing to answer any questions about the units. His legal team has only issued a statement. No comment at this time. However, inside sources from the DOJ say that Rick has hinted at writing a full report about the collection, which he claims no one will understand unless they see the whole picture. Some believe he plans to use his memoir as leverage, hoping to bargain for a more humane prison condition or eventual access to psychiatric facilities. Others believe he simply wants to have the final word after the raid. The public reaction shifted from shock to outrage. Protests erupted outside the now permanently closed pawn shop. Former fans demanded answers, victim families filed civil lawsuits, and Congress held emergency hearings on regulations concerning human remains in private collections. But perhaps the most chilling realization was that this whole operation had been conducted openly for decades, hidden behind a beloved reality TV show, disguised with smiles and pricing masked by the trust of millions, only discovered because an anonymous voice decided to speak up. The FBI has not disclosed the identity of the whistleblower, but Cory Harrison believes he knows who it is. Hiding in one of the most luxurious and secluded corners of Las Vegas, behind iron gates and security cameras spinning with strange precision, Rick Harrison's estate stood as a house that to outsiders looked like a luxurious property owned by a man who made millions from television. High walls, desert landscape, oversized garage, an illusion carefully curated. But behind that illusion was something entirely different. It wasn't until the FBI raided the storage units that the task force turned their attention to Rick's personal residence. The original warrant only included assets related to his business, but as more evidence emerged, especially ledgers, footage, and storage logs referencing a home vault, authorities knew they had to search deeper. On a quiet Wednesday morning, a convoy of unmarked SUVs entered the neighborhood. The agents didn't knock. They arrived with a tactical entry team, a court order, and an increasing sense of fear. If the storage units were any indication that Rick was hiding something, the estate could be something much worse. And it was a house that at first glance seemed ordinary but luxurious. Imported marble floors, Italian furniture, high-end electronics, nothing unusual for a wealthy man like Rick. The collection of antique books and historical memorabilia lined the walls, and some rooms were decorated as themed galleries. A living room styled after a Civil War officer's quarters, an office decorated with Cold War propaganda, a library full of ancient civilization books, secret societies, and obscure mystical philosophies. Nothing criminal, just eccentric, until they reached the wine cellar. The entrance was disguised behind a temperature-controlled glass wall. Dozens of wine bottles were stacked on shelves, but one of the bottom shelves was a bait. When removed, this time, they discovered a biometric scanner. Unlike the storage unit, it worked. Rick's fingerprints were already in the database. The sliding door behind it opened to what the FBI knew to be a safe. It wasn't a wine cellar. It was a stairway leading down, made of concrete and steel painted in sterile white. The air was noticeably colder, chilled, each step down feeling like entering a different reality. The further the agents went, the quieter it became. No outside noise, no signal, complete isolation. At the bottom of the stairs was a hallway with 3 doors. 2 were locked, and the third was ajar. That's where they began. The first room was a fully equipped laboratory, tables stacked with surgical instruments, microscopes, jars containing preserved organic material. The walls were decorated with anatomical charts, some standard, others with disturbing drawings, combining human biology with symbols from alchemical texts and mysterious documents. A bulletin board displayed photos of dozens of victims in various states of preservation. Some autopsy notes hastily written in the margins, a specific line circled in red ink. The right eye remains intact for memory retention. Next to the board was a bookshelf stacked with videotapes labeled with dates and personal names. One tape stood out. Cory. On May 17, 2005, the tape was still under review. Its content was classified, but it confirmed what investigators feared. Rick not only recorded his crimes, but also recorded those around him. The second room took things further. Agents described it as a psychological torture gallery. The walls were lined with 2-way mirrors, confirmed by structural engineers. In the center was an examination chair equipped with handcuffs, and dried fluid stains covered the floor. One agent, a decorated veteran, vomited upon entering. They also found journals here. These were more erratic, filled with symbols, mysterious phrases, lines that repeated and spiraled like the manifesto of a madman. Phrases as if they were etched into bone marrow, and the ship must know its role. The third door, the door no one wanted to open, required a passcode and took hours to scan retinal patterns. But when they finally opened it, they stepped into a room so cold it felt like being burned. It was about 30 feet by 40 feet, carved into the ground and reinforced with lead-lined walls. Glass shelves covered one wall, each shelf holding what could only be described as skull fragments, human body dissections, preserved hands, and spines. But the true horror lay in the center of the room. 6 cylindrical tanks, each 6 feet tall, filled with a clear liquid suspension and equipped with internal lights. Inside each tank was a preserved body hanging, eyes wide open. Some were children, others adults, male and female, each with tattoos of identification, scars, or jewelry noted in missing persons reports across the country. Floating with them in the tanks were objects, keys, rings, handwritten notes, sealed bags, souvenirs, or spoils. One tank, the 5th tank, held a woman with broken ribs. On the glass was a handwritten message etched into the condensation with a finger. "She wants to go home." The tanks were powered by an underground generator independent of the main house's electrical grid. Anyone who built this system wanted it to work even during power outages. One engineer later told the press that it was something you'd expect to find in a cold storage facility, not a suburban mansion. The entire operation was illegal at every imaginable level: biological ownership, desecration of human remains, unlicensed research, illegal storage of hazardous materials. But more than that, it pointed to something cold, intentional. Rick wasn't just preserving bodies. He was keeping stories. Each container had an accompanying binder, filled with written narratives about who the person was or who Rick imagined they were. One man was listed as a watchmaker from Munich, a woman as the keeper of Alexandria's secrets, a child described as a prophet of the future, 2045. None of these descriptions matched any known records. They were figments, as if Rick had tried to rewrite their identities into something he could control, turning victims into characters, objects into relics, terror into history. Forensic psychiatrists now believe this behavior signifies a condition called storage delusion, a compulsion to document, control, and mythologize reality as a way to assert dominance over it. But that diagnosis did little to alleviate the pain of families now facing the truth. Outside the estate, authorities established a security perimeter for 2 weeks. The holding cell was considered the scene of a federal crime. Medical examiners rotated shifts 24/7. DNA samples were extracted, and sealed interviews were conducted. Cory was placed under protective custody. He said nothing, didn't cry. He walked down the hallway, stopped at the top of the stairs, and only said one thing: "I know there's something under the house." That sentence now echoes in court documents, investigative reports, and media coverage, because what Rick Harrison built beneath his mansion was not a shelter but a temple, not to honor history, but to himself. The world had watched Cory Harrison for over a decade, not as a spokesperson or advocate, but as Rick Harrison's likable, sometimes impulsive son, working behind the counter of a pawn shop in Las Vegas on a hit reality TV show for pawn shop fans. He was a familiar face, a learned man, cracking jokes with chum Lee and navigating business pressures with his often imposing father. But the man sitting down for the interview would reshape his public image. Not the Cory the audience remembered from TV. The usual smile, the relaxed attitude, gone. What remained was a haunted look, raw vulnerability, and the weight of a truth too heavy to carry any longer. The quiet room, just a camera, a light overhead, no makeup, no crew, just Cory, his hands resting on his thighs, shoulders tense. And the interviewer, Elijah Rhodes, a longtime friend and filmmaker, understood better than anyone the importance of letting silence work its magic. The next tape was an unfiltered confession, a chilling story, and a public calculation. The first question was very simple. When did you realize your father wasn't the person he said he was? Cory didn't immediately answer his question. His eyes dropped to the floor, his fingers tightened slightly. There was no moment. Finally, he said, "It's not like a movie where you stumble upon the monster's lair and everything is fine. It's the little things, spread out over years, things you ignore until they pile up to a point where you can't see around them anymore." He took a deep breath and continued. "The first time I really felt it, felt that something was wrong. I was 16. I had just started working full-time at the shop. Dad gave me the key to the back storage. It wasn't a regular storage room. It was the old one, the file storage room where we kept unsold inventory boxes and appraisal sheets. I thought I'd go organize them, maybe find something interesting. But instead, I found a file cabinet chained shut. The audience watching later would never see the camera slightly shake as Elijah adjusted the focus, but they would feel the tension as Cory paused again. "I broke it open," he said. "The curiosity of youth, you know." Inside were dozens of photographs, some black and white, some Polaroids. None of them seemed staged. Most were pictures of people I didn't recognize, but some were familiar customers who'd been to the shop years ago. All of them were lying down, eyes wide open, frozen. I don't know how to describe it anymore. He closed his eyes for a moment. I opened my eyes, locked it up, never asked him about it again, he said. That was the first of many moments I buried. The next moment came after many years. I started noticing packages being delivered after hours, always through the back door, no barcodes, no invoices, just boxes. Sometimes I heard them being pushed into storage, but I never saw what was inside. Then came the arguments. Dad would have meetings with guys I'd never met before, guys who weren't like collectors or dealers. No small talk, just tension. And then he changed completely, almost cold, when asked why he didn't speak up sooner. Cory was blunt. "Because he's Rick Harrison," he said. "Because the world loves him. Because if I said something, I'd be the crazy one, the bitter son trying to tear his family apart. No one would believe me." He leaned forward, his voice quieter. "And because I didn't want to believe it either." The interviewer then shifted to the topic of the raid, right when Rick was arrested. The evidence found in the storage units, the tanks in the room, the notes, the footage. "How did you feel when you saw what they found?" Elijah asked. Cory's voice cracked for the first time. "I felt relief. There was silence, not shame, not guilt, but a sense of relief, exhaustion. I wasn't crazy," he said. "I wasn't making it up, that's the truth. All of that. Those monsters I thought were in my head. They were in the basement all that time." He continued, his voice now calmer, but that relief didn't last. Because right after that came the guilt. I could have said something, maybe years ago. Maybe someone would still be alive if I had. Cory then described the moment he received the letter. It came 3 days after the sentencing, no return address, just 5 words. "You always knew, say nothing." He stared at the camera. I knew that was it. I couldn't stay silent anymore. When asked if he believed Rick regretted it, Cory didn't hesitate. "No," he said. "I think he feels proud." That answer struck a nerve with viewers nationwide. For many, it reshaped everything. Rick Harrison wasn't just a lost man, according to his own son. He was a man who chose his path. Cory elaborated further. Everything he did, cataloging those bodies, preserving them, staging them, it wasn't chaos. It was meticulous. It was obsession. He thought he was preserving history. That's what he always said when going too deep into something. We're not collectors. We're curators. The interviewer then played a short clip from one of the recovered tapes, just the audio, Rick's calm and deliberate voice. We shape the story. We decide who. The problem, if they didn't matter before, they matter now. Cory visibly shuddered hearing that tone. I've heard him say that all my life. He'd use it when talking about clients, about the artifacts, but I never thought he meant it literally. The topic shifted to public reaction, fan response, media coverage. Cory was unwavering. They should be angry, he said. All the people who watched us, who invited us into their homes, they've been lied to. They're watching an illusion, a carefully edited fantasy, and I was part of it. Then the question was posed. What would you say to the families of the victims? Cory's eyes welled with tears. I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. I didn't respect your pain. I thought it was all in my head. I saw things I should have questioned and I didn't. I can't change what he did, but I can promise you, I'll never be silent again. No makeup could cover the redness of his face. No PR team polished his words. Just a man breaking down after years of being forced to play a role. In the final 10 minutes, Cory spoke of healing, therapy, and the plan to use any remaining resources to help identify more victims, support forensic teams, and create a fund in the name of those lost. I don't want a redemption arc, he said. I want to take responsibility. He was asked one final question. If Rick Harrison is watching this right now, what would you say to him? Cory stared at the camera for a long while. I'd say, I'm no longer your son. The footage was cut when the interview aired, sparking a media storm, but much of the feedback wasn't disdain. It was empathy. For the first time since the scandal erupted, Cory Harrison was no longer seen as a silent accomplice, but as a survivor of the hidden legacy of manipulation by evil lurking right in front of them. Within just a few days, the full interview had been viewed by over 50 million people. Online news channels replayed clips on loop, advocacy groups praised his transparency, and the families of the victims sent letters. Not all of them forgave him, but many acknowledged the courage to speak out. During all this, Cory remained silent, not about the truth, but about the fame. He turned down offers, declined interviews, and donated his speaking fees to the families of the identified victims. For him, it was no longer about justice through the courts, but about truth through confession. And in that interview, he did what no courtroom could, gave a voice to the silenced. They felt like family, that unspoken connection between Pawn Stars and millions of viewers. It wasn't just about trading, not just about antiques, trinkets, or the strange things in history. It was about the characters. Rick, Cory, Chum Lee, and the late Richard Harrison. People tuned in not just to witness the deals, but to feel like they were stepping into a place where history came alive and friendly banners filled the air. So when the truth began to unfold, when news broke that Rick Harrison had been sentenced to life in prison, when the FBI issued statements about secret storage units containing human remains, and a dark obsession disguised as preservation, The betrayal hit the fans hard. The initial reaction was confusion. Some thought it was a setup. A few outright refused to believe it, but denial didn't last long when faced with video evidence and the federal indictment. Within hours of Cory's interview going online, the ripple effect spread to every corner of fan forums on the internet, where debates once filled with excitement over rare coins and quirky details became dark topics with headlines like, "How do I and they not know how to feel anymore?" It quickly dominated the front pages of the Pawn Stars community. Longtime viewers poured out their shock in posts. Some expressed skepticism, others anger, and many heartbreak. One post went viral with the message, "My dad and I watched Pawn Stars every Sunday night for over 10 years. It was our ritual. I used to dream of visiting the shop with him. Now I feel sick just thinking about it." On Reddit, the subreddit /Pawnstar was overloaded to the point that moderators had to temporarily lock new posts to avoid crashing the servers. When it reopened, the subreddit was unrecognizable. Not a community, but a digital prayer session. Memes that once honored Rick with his signature line, "The best I can do is," were replaced with dark sarcasm. One image shared over 60,000 times showed Rick behind bars saying, "The best I can do is life." But it wasn't just online. The real world also reacted. Within 48 hours of the full story going viral, the pawn shop on Las Vegas Boulevard, once teeming with foot traffic, saw a drastic decline. The iconic sign became a photo backdrop for thousands, a site of protest. People showed up with signs, some holding candles, others carrying photos of missing loved ones now rumored to be connected to what was called Rick's collection. Local news reported scenes of longtime fans burning merchandise in the parking lot. A woman, clearly emotional, held a framed photo of her with Rick from a visit in 2014. She dropped it onto the sidewalk and stepped on it. "I thought he was a good man," she told reporters. "I took my kids to meet him." The betrayal wasn't just personal, but from fathers and sons, mothers and daughters, across generations, families who had made Pawn Stars a part of their routine. The ritual was now grappling with the reality that the show had been a front for something unimaginable, and the damage ran deep. History Channel quickly issued a prepared statement. The network said, "We are deeply saddened and confused by the revelations surrounding Rick Harrison. Pawn Stars has been removed from all platforms pending further review. We extend our condolences to the victims and their families." But even that wasn't enough to quell public outrage. A class action lawsuit was filed against A&E Networks and History Channel by a group of former fans, claiming the network had deliberately concealed signs of criminal behavior and profited from creating and promoting a dangerous character under the guise of family entertainment. The lawsuit, unprecedented in its scale, quickly gained attention. Over 40,000 signatures flooded a petition demanding the permanent removal of Pawn Stars episodes from all streaming platforms. The collectibles market also felt the shock. Previously, Rick Harrison signed items had sold for hundreds of dollars online, but their value plummeted to almost nothing. No branded Pawn Stars merchandise was pawned overnight. Recalled from major retailers and online sellers marked their listings as tainted or not for resale. A notable memorabilia website issued an apology for having sold merchandise from the show and refunded any purchases of Rick Harrison signed items made within the last 5 years. Ironically, a new sub-market began to emerge. Morbid collectors searching for unaired episodes and behind-the-scenes footage, as blacklisted media listings for Pawn Stars banned recordings began to appear on eBay within days, some priced at thousands of dollars. The FBI then issued a warning to both buyers and sellers, confirming that owning certain materials, especially those related to the investigation, could lead to legal action. But while collectors scrambled in the shadows, the majority of fans wanted nothing more to do with Rick Harrison. On YouTube reaction videos, algorithms flooded with previously loyal fans sharing personal stories. Reviewers who once praised the show now issued apologies for supporting it. Renowned YouTube historians, who had collaborated with the Pawn Stars brand for educational segments, posted videos with titles like, "I trusted him, and this is not history, this is horror." Podcast hosts exposed the scandal. Late-night talk show hosts delivered biting monologues, some humorous, others clearly shocked. A segment on a major satirical news show had a chilling joke. Turns out, when Rick said he wanted a piece of history, he meant your femur. The emotional response was a shared sense of disappointment, disgust, sorrow, and grief, not just for the victims and their families, but for the loss of something that once brought daily connection. The show had become a part of people's lives. It had accompanied dinner, the background noise while cleaning, something safe to watch with grandparents, a comforting show now turned toxic. A tweet quickly garnered attention, perfectly summarizing the mood. "I didn't just lose a show. I lost years of trusting in comfort. He stole that from all of us." As weeks passed, the emotional weight of the betrayal grew into something angrier. Fan clubs disbanded. Facebook pages dedicated to Rick Harrison became ghost towns. The official Pawn Stars Instagram account lost over 2 million followers in a week. Protesters began organizing events, not only outside the pawn shop, but also at filming locations. Documentary screenings became impromptu support groups, where attendees wept, vented, and shared their need for closure. It was clear that Pawn Stars was not just a show, but a cultural comfort, and Rick Harrison had not only broken the law, but violated that comfort for Cory. The confession, though appreciated by many, did not heal the cracks, but it helped redirect the fanbase's fury. Fans stopped blaming Cory. They began to understand the manipulation Rick had caused, not only to his victims but to everyone around him. However, the damage was irreparable for most people. The betrayal marked the end of an era. No number of deleted episodes or rebranded merchandise could erase what was now etched into public consciousness. The pawn shop, once an iconic symbol of America, had become a symbol of deceit, and Rick Harrison, once a beloved household name to millions, would now be remembered for something entirely different. The man who turned history into horror while the world cheered him on. If you found this story intriguing and full of shocking details, don't forget to hit like and share the video so others can uncover these untold secrets. Leave your comment below to let us know your thoughts. And be sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any exciting videos in the future. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next one.